this is Doofus, and you're listening to Duck Talks. Didn't know we could, did ya?
DuckTalks is part of Res TV's network of podcasts. Check out res.tv for other great podcasts. It's the week of Monday, January 4th, and you're listening to episode 58 of Duck Talks. Hey there, and welcome to Duck Talks. Thanks for joining us this week. I am here. My name's Mitch, and I'm with Josh.
Hey, guys.
And we're here recording an intro. It's not Monday for us, but we're not going to tell you what day it is. It's a few days after our recording of episode 58. But we wanted to record a quick intro and just cover a little bit of the news. It's a lot of fun having people on the podcast. And this week we had a guest host with us, and it was a lot of fun, but it didn't allow us the time to also go over any news or to record an intro because we just jumped in the conversation. But we had a lot of fun talking with Dan Cunningham this week. We've been following Dan for a while online. We recognize Dan to be a wealth of duck information. He knows his Disney ducks. He knows well beyond Disney ducks, but that was the main reason why we followed him. He was always posting some really great information, some historical moments, different stuff from various theatrical releases and shorts and just everything, books, comic books. Notice that, and so we've been following him and talking with him for a while. Earlier this year, we decided to start doing what we ended up naming Beyond DuckTales. Beyond DuckTales is our adventure exploration through the older comics. We started with the Don Rosa library. We reached out to Fantagraphics. They loved the idea. We were going to do it online with an audience that we could interact with on Discord, and it went really well in the very beginning, or it was going really well as we were getting ready to do it, but before we were able to start, something happened with Discord and suddenly we couldn't record, so that ended up being taken offline. We had promised those people who were going to go through it with us that we would do it on Discord. So we decided to do all of the Don Rosa library, our journey through all 10 volumes with them offline. We talked about it a little bit along the way, made sure we were inviting others to join us when they wanted to. But now that we finished Don Rosa, we told that group we wanted everyone to be able to experience this. We want to talk about these great publications that, or these great releases that Fantagraphics has put out with everyone. And so we wanted to include it as part of Duck Talks. And so for our kickoff, we thought what better way to get started than to bring someone on who knows a lot about Fantagraphics. And Josh, I think you can agree with me, Dan Cunningham knows a lot about Fantagraphics.
Oh, yeah. Well, I had never started reading any of the Carl Barks prior to this, and just going into the conversation, he just knew a ton of background on the writers of all the Duck comics and the backgrounds and story plots and how they connect, and it was just a great experience to hear about all the past history of what was before DuckTales. And we didn't know prior to this. We just thought DuckTales was almost kind of a source material where that's what I thought anyways. I don't know about you guys, but we had known that there were DuckTales comics, but we just didn't know what the relationship was between the comics and the TV show, because oftentimes comics are their own things, and in this case they're their own kind of universe, but the relationship that they draw from the comics is just it's just got such a rich history that they even still draw the storylines and kind of characters from these comics they still use in the new DuckTales show.
For me, it was really when we started diving into Duck Talks and having conversations with people online, and people were really recommending that we go back and read Don Rosa and Carl Barks. And I did know that those individuals had written comics, but like you said, I didn't realize just how great they were, honestly. And when we started looking into some of their stories, we did find that it was stuff that we enjoyed. So we wanted to dive deeper. And Fantagraphics just partnered with us, supported the show, and they've been amazing. We love that company. I love what they've provided for us so that we could do this. And now we're moving into the Carl Barks collection, the Carl Barks library. And so this episode of Duck Talks, you're going to hear in just a moment. We got a couple of news items to go over, but you're going to hear in just a few moments a discussion that we had with Dan Cunningham, pretty much just kind of setting the stage for Fantagraphics' Carl Barks library, and talking about the setup. We talk about a few of the stories, and we're still trying to figure out, when we were doing this online with people, we were really just kind of talking about each story. I don't know that that's what we're going to do, bringing Beyond DuckTales onto the podcast, because, I mean, some of those conversations were hours, because there was 300 pages in some of those volumes. I think there's over 200. There's not quite 300, I don't think, but a lot of information. The behind-the-scenes stuff's what I really enjoy, and we just want to share that with you. So if you're reading those volumes, Volume 6 will be the next one that we do. We're going to do it in about 2 weeks, and we'll try to give a date for that coming up soon, but it should be about 2 weeks. We'll do Volume 6, and if you have it, you can read through it, maybe thumb through some of your favorite stories, maybe, or, you know, if you buy it for the first time, you can find great deals on Amazon. Check out our website. We have some blogs about them. Pirate's been doing reviews, and we always include Amazon affiliate links, which supports our podcast and our website. We really appreciate that. We don't ask for any money. That's one thing that, you know, we've tried not to do, but in order to be able to get a hold of, you know, things and to review things and, you know, to do stuff like this, is really great when we can just offer a link to Amazon and you can buy stuff you were going to buy anyway, and it supports the podcast at no cost to you. So that's why we chose Amazon affiliates. But anyway, I'm really excited that we did this week. It was a lot of fun. And before we do that, we've got just a few. I think we got 2 items. Actually, one item, and frankly speaking, is all Josh and I are going to talk about real quick. So this week, Disguise Incorporated added the Launchpad costume to their 2019 lineup. You might remember that last year we talked about their great DuckTales lineup. They had Scrooge and they had Gizmo Duck costumes for Halloween. And originally they had a launch pad. We saw pictures of it and everything, and then it got dropped from the line. It has been added for 2019. The costumes will not be ready until sometime in the summer, but you can go to their website and follow that. We did a blog about it, and there's a link there that will take you to the website. Or you can Google it, whatever, however you prefer to do it. But Pirate did write up a blog, so that's great. You plan on going as Launchpad this year?
I would like to be Launchpad. That would be pretty cool. It looks like an awesome costume. Do we know yet if the prior costumes will be available as well this year, or is it just going to be Launchpad?
They are still on the website, so I think they're going to be there. And we've had some conversations with Disguise, and from what we've gathered from those conversations, the DuckTales costumes were a hit, and they've got a number of new properties that they got the license for this year. They're going to have a lot of costumes out for Halloween. They already did. But there's a lot of properties that I think people who follow this show are going to be familiar with.
Well, I'm hoping that they also include some other surprise costumes by the time Halloween rolls around. I mean, I'm crossing my fingers for a Darkwing Duck, or even a Webby would be pretty awesome to have. I mean, there's not really much DuckTales costumes out there, so this is perfect for our fan base to kind of show off our love for these characters.
Yes, but I would like to add that these costumes, their current lineup, are all kids sizes, but the masks will fit adult heads, as you can see in the many pictures Pirate took with his kids' costumes.
Yeah. Well, Pirate Steve has didn't he do a costume as Launchpad as well, though? Just like a cosplay type of costume, right?
Yeah, they were on a Disney cruise for Halloween. Halloween's a big deal for them, and one of the nights that they dressed up, he did Launchpad.
Well, he can get this costume, and he can have the mask to go along with his costume.
Yep.
Be awesome.
And I still like the idea that Frank had of spray painting the Scrooge McDuck one to look like, to get that paint that looks like stone to do a
yeah.
You just need a horse, cool. A horse body costume. It's perfect.
Yeah.
So you can check that out. Let's see. The next thing we had was Frankly Speaking, the return of Frankly Speaking, another week. Frank was asked over on Tumblr by someone, and I'm not going to read the question, but they're pretty passionate about the hiatus, and they want to know when the hiatus is going to end. And Frank, made sure that everyone knew they have zero power about when it airs, but he did add, I will say that we just saw some new promos, so I'm hopeful for more news soon. So that's great news. Of course, a lot of people jumped to the conclusion, to many conclusions about the show returning soon, or that these promos would begin airing soon. And Frank, of course, had to go back to the internet and kind of clarify a little bit more. And someone on Tumblr asked him, more promos, you say? When will those be public? And he says, no idea. Again, I can't say much about what I've seen and what I know about the programming strategy. And this is not a confirmation of anything, except that there are cool things happening eventually. We've been collaborating with programming on some cool ideas coming soon, but we'll have to wait a bit to talk about that. So just further confirmation that we don't know when the show is going to return. Honestly, it doesn't sound like it's going to be soon. We know the show's not going to be back in February, but the fact that these promos are out there means that there's another push. And if you remember, the last time we had a push, we had every day in May. I was thinking it was June, but June was when the show went back to normal schedule. Every day in May was when we were getting episodes on Friday evenings. New episodes on Friday evenings, but there was an episode every day of the week for DuckTales.
Mm-hmm. Wasn't there a pod? I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Didn't we have a blog post of the upcoming run of episodes that are going to be aired this coming up month? Is it this month or next month, where they're going to be showing a lot of the past episodes?
That was on Twitter. That was a Twitter account that I came across called Disney Schedule Thread, and I got to looking at what they do, and they're all the time showing the schedule. And I don't know where they get this format of the schedule, but it's color coded, so you can really tell where things are. And so it was for that week, and it showed that there was a DuckTales marathon going on. Actually, that was the week before this post that I'm looking at. There was a couple of days where there were a ton of episodes running back to back, but then the schedule that I'm looking at right now was showing 2 episodes per day. And then, of course, there was this past weekend, there were a couple of episodes on Saturday, but they have all been reruns.
Okay, but that was for this month, though, right?
Well, that's actually just a week.
That was just a week.
Yeah, so it's showing every 30 minutes, 5 or 7 days for the week. So, like, the one I'm looking at right now was February 4th through the 10th. And so it shows every show that's airing on Disney XD.
Okay.
Which DuckTales is getting a lot. Like, DuckTales is on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, at least 5 times on Disney XD every day. Except for, looks like on Friday the 8th, Big Hero 6 is getting a huge marathon. They're going to be airing from 7 till like sometime in the morning. But yeah, it's a cool account. I've been trying to look at that because they get that information out there pretty quick. So expect to see some retweets from us. Looks like the post I'm looking at, it's not the post that I retweeted a few days back. This is one they posted today. More reruns of DuckTales. So Disney XD is showing a lot of reruns of DuckTales right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, hopefully that just means that they're just trying to get it out there some more and get it kind of to help saturate it to the market so that that people know about the show and start liking the show. I'm just kind of getting to my point of bringing that tweet up was that I'm hoping that when it's getting closer to the time for additional announcements, like Frank was mentioning that they have promos for that maybe we'll start seeing those promos when we start seeing them playing DuckTales more and more to kind of ramp up the excitement for additional new episodes.
Yeah, and it sounds like these promos might have some kind of theme to them, like there's something going on, and I think it'll be the big push for when the show comes back. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, I think we're going into March. I don't think we're premiering at the beginning of March. There's some rumblings of some stuff happening, first week, second week of March, and we know Disney Channel does not like to put their shows up against, they don't premiere a bunch of stuff at one time. They like to stagger it in. So I'm really starting to think we might even be second week into March, or hopefully not every day in May. But, honestly, they really loved having it in the summer. So, I don't know. I saw some new stuff for Tangled. Some talk about, the release of when new Tangled episodes will be out. No word on DuckTales, but those shows are coming sooner, I would imagine. So, we'll see. Man, let's go ahead and play that recording from earlier in the week and let everyone listen to us talk with Dan about Fantagraphics and wonderful Duck comics. We also talk about the show, the current show, and DuckTales the movie and all that stuff. But yeah, let's play that. We're going to move to a new part of the podcast. Now, this isn't new for us, but this is something that is going to be new for Duck Talks. Several months ago, Pirate, you may remember how long ago that was, but I can't remember. When we started the Don Rosa library through Fantagraphics, we started something called Beyond DuckTales. And we promised the people on Twitter, we promised our listeners that this was something we were going to do interactive, and so we set aside time to meet and discuss the Don Rosa library that had been put out by Fantagraphics over on Discord. However, we had an update to Discord that messed up our recording, so we weren't able to record all of those sessions and all those meetings and discussions. But we felt that promise was important. We'd made a promise to several people that we were going to do that, so we held to it throughout the Don Rosa library. But now we're glad to be able to move beyond DuckTales, our study of the past Disney comics, or the Disney Duck comics, to Duck Talks. And this will be the first installation of that segment. And in order to do that, we thought we'd do something fun. We thought we'd do something different for our podcast. This year we're trying to have more people on to give more voices to the duck community. And we thought, who would be the best person to sit down and talk about Disney Duck comics and Fantagraphics in particular, and Carl Barks? Who could we talk to? How about Dan Cunningham? So we have Dan on the line with us. How's it going, Dan?
Hey guys, how are you? It's a pleasure to be here.
We're doing great. We're having a fabulous time. It's been a great year. 2019's already been a lot of fun, and we're getting ready for more and more Fantagraphic releases. And we've kind of done this backwards. I think we were talking about this before on Twitter. We kind of started backwards. We started with Don Rosa's. Which that library is complete now. That was kind of planned on our part. But we started with the Don Rosa library, and now we're moving to the Carl Barks library.
That's right. You're doing it kind of you're doing the Star Wars prequel style. You got the original trilogy, and then you're going back.
That's right. And there's a lot of stuff that we learned. I kept saying all the way through through those volumes, man, I'm reading the story and I get that there's something behind this that I don't understand. I can't wait to find out what this is about.
And very often with Don Rosa, there could be 5 different references in one story to a Carl Barks stuff. So it's, there's a very long tail when you start with Rosa.
And that's one of the great parts about what Fantagraphics has done with these volumes is at the end of each volume, there's also kind of behind the scenes You get a lot of information about the individual comics. I mean, Don was involved in that process with Fantagraphics, but you also got some of his story. There's kind of a biography. If you put all of the volumes together, you get a life story of what was going on with him as he was writing these stories.
That's right. Yeah, he actually, he really ingrained his own interests into his stories, and it certainly shows. I mean, I think it's fair to say that Don Rosa is far more meticulous than Carl Barks ever was, and it was intentional. He really had a microscope onto a microscope in terms of what Barks did, and he really exhaustively studied all those stories and made a cohesive timeline. And he had to make some judicious edits, but he also took unbelievable care to get scientific facts correct, and he would go cross-check with experts, always at the library, historical facts. I mean, you really have to respect the work he put into it for the return of what a comic book artist would get for something like that. He put in about 20 times the work than what he was originally paid for those stories.
It brings up a good argument of who is the best Duck writer and illustrator, if it's Barks or Rosa. I know Rosa would actually say it was Barks, but I haven't read through all of Don's material and haven't started in probably about halfway through Carl's stuff. I love Rosa's style and what he was able to do with source material with Barks stuff. I was trying to think of it in the car of what a good comparison would be, and it's kind of like Carl Barks' Disneyland. He's the original. Everybody loves him a lot because of what he was able to start and bring these characters. And then Don Rosa's the Walt Disney World, who really expanded, and his stories are I feel like 3 times as large as Carl's, because his are a lot of his are 30 pages and Carl's are 10 pages. So it's good to see have Rosa fans out there and Barks fans.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Disneyland to Disney World comparison works very well because, that was a 16-year difference, 55 for Disneyland and 71 for Disney World. And you really think about it, they had a pretty good foundation by the time they got to open up in Florida. They learned tons before they actually got things running in Florida. So it does work that way. And Barks, of course, did do long adventures, but he was reined in by the time, the Comics Code, Dell, and Gold Key, anyone over at Western Publishing. They were very scrupulous about what they would let in those comic books. Barks was fortunate to have a very good editor at Western, a man named Chase Craig, and he was very fond of Carl, and Carl was very fond of him. They worked well together, so he really let him do what he wanted to do. But there was a lot of things you couldn't do in the 40s and 50s and 60s that you could get away with when Rosa began in the 80s and 90s, obviously. So you have that difference of time and of a little bit of a looser editorship, a little bit of a looser code to work with. But I agree with you with that. The Rosa stuff is epic in its own scope, and you can pore over one page for 10 minutes if you choose to.
When I opened up that first volume of the Don Rosa Library and started going through it, and then when I got to the end and was reading, the commentary, and he was talking about, how it was the first time he had drawn these characters professionally. It's the first time he had drawn, for publication.
Yes.
And he was talking about how, he doesn't like looking at some of that art. And I'm looking at that first story thinking, I thought it was gorgeous. All of the detail, and you could just see the passion and the love that he had for what he was working on. And I just love that about the book. And it captivated me from the very first story. I was ready to go through this library and read every story from the very beginning.
Absolutely. That was the Son of the Sun, right?
It's the Son of the Sun, yeah.
And that story was unbelievably captivating. I was, I think it was 1988, correct?
I believe so.
I think that was Gladstone. I remember I actually, the prior issue to Uncle Scrooge, they said, we're going to have a new story. I didn't know who Don Rosa was, and and the next month I bought it, and it blew my mind, because here's someone who not only really got that Barks style, but unbelievably sophisticated dialogue, and he kept touching back on the things from all the old stories for the first time. No one really done that, even in Europe. He had the goose egg nugget and the golden fleece and the 1916 quarter. All this stuff, and all the characters were right. And Glomgold was there, and he was pretty diabolical, where some of the European comics kind of like watered him down a little bit.
When he pulled that gun in the airplane,
yes.
I was like, wait a minute, this is a Duck comic.
Yep, exactly. And that's exactly the kind of thing I'm talking about. I think Barks could have had him do that, but I don't think it would have been nearly as vicious as that panel. He's about to jump out the plane, and, he's kind of foreshortening angle on Glomgold, and he was menacing, boy, in that one. And it really it blew my mind. And and again, you can see the conclusion, some of the splash pages of the temple and revealing of the disc in the when the light hits it. I mean, it was incredible stuff. And then Rosa boy, did he keep going. I mean, every year there was one or two new 32-page long stories, and they built. And then, when you got to Last Led to Dawson, went back to, Goldie and all that stuff. It was mind-blowing at that time. It's still mind-blowing today, because all that stuff, he was building blocks. And I don't think he intended to do The Life of Scrooge. I think Egmont, the editors overseas, kind of compelled him to do it maybe a decade before he was ready to do it. That's what he had said. And when they got to that, it's like, oh my, holy crow. It just, everything you always wanted to know was poured into those stories, from start to finish. So he fulfilled the kind of the fan fiction before fan fiction. He really filled in gaps that we were always kind of wondering about, that no one had ever touched on before. But beyond that, even the original adventures, he came up with his own antagonists, his own characters, and he did a great job. I can't give Don Rosa enough credit, because my gosh, after Carl, stopped doing stories, there was a 25-year drought, and then Don Rosa came in, and he not only built upon what Barks did, but my God, he elevated it. Would you agree with that?
Oh, definitely. We've said it's epic storytelling. And a lot of because we grew up with DuckTales, and that was really our introduction. And we've talked about that a lot on our podcast. And that's kind of what Beyond DuckTales is all about. We started with the 87 cartoon, and we enjoyed this show. And then we got into the fact that the new show was coming out. And then we had a hiatus, and we were like, there's all these comics everybody keeps talking about. Maybe we ought to take the time to read these. So we started looking at what would it take for us to be able to read through these, and Fantagraphics just come alongside us, and they've been phenomenal. They're a great sponsor of our show, and Beyond DuckTales is kind of our love letter back to them now. But we've been able to go through and read these stories, and while we're reading it, we're like, This is the source material for DuckTales.
It is the Genesis point. That's exactly right. And it's so remarkable that these stories just, to have, in 1987, when the original series premiered, those stories were already, 30 to 40 years old. They took a lot of DNA from Carl, obviously. And they could only do so much with it because of, again, it was an afternoon kids show, so you kind of had to get Scrooge to be a little more grandfatherly for that audience, and they couldn't use Donald for the kind of, he was kind of a prestige character, so they could only use him sparingly, and that dynamic, that was the dynamic that kind of just, it never quite worked for me on the original series, where it works much better in the current series. The thing no one ever seems to talk about is, if you look at the original Barks comics or the Rosa stuff and the current series, it's really 3 generations of a family. Mm-hmm. And you have Scrooge, and you have his nephew, and then you have his grandnephews. And Donald is this wonderful buffer between them, where the kids, love them both, but, Donald is kind of their parent figure, and Scrooge is kind of Donald's parent figure, but he's kind of like his layabout lazy nephew. So Donald kind of takes abuse on both ends. If you saw Scrooge being really antagonistic or kind of, cruel to the kids, it wouldn't sit right with you, would it?
Right. Well, that first episode of DuckTales.
Exactly.
I mean, a lot of the introduction of the characters feels kind of harsh.
It does.
Scrooge walking down the street going, why would you ever give money to the poor? And, and all of that, and locking the kids up in the attic.
Yep.
I mean, it does. It comes off harsh. And
it's great character work. And as a matter of fact, Alan Young was the original, with Scrooge for many, many years. And of course, from DuckTales. And he came in to the records for the first time. And, he had done Mickey's Christmas Carol about 5 years prior. And he came in with that mindset. And one of the storymen, the showrunners was Jim Magon. And, he kind of came in all tight. And Jim said, Alan, only for this first half of this episode. And then you need to lighten it up because, you're going to be their caregiver. You love them. You don't know it yet. So he kind of had to shed the gruffness very quickly. And Alan was a great actor. He was very adept at that. And if you look at that original series, you look at that 100 episodes and even the film, Alan Young could be crotchety and just cantankerous and cranky. And then he could turn and he could be affectionate and loving as Scrooge. And you bought it. You never once, when you heard that voice, you never once thought there was an actor doing it. You thought it was that character.
Yeah, to the point that when I started reading the comics, Don Rosa's comics, and was introduced to Carl Barks' introduction of Scrooge, it felt like a totally different character to me to some extent. There was a little bit of a shock of, this really isn't the Scrooge that I grew up with.
That's right.
But the heart is there. And as I read through the stories and learned more about that Scrooge, I started making the connections to the heart of DuckTales. And I could see how they were, because they were making like you said, a child's making children's programming. So they did have to change certain aspects of it. And not having Donald in it really does change the dynamic of the show a lot.
Exactly.
And that's one of the things I love about the new show. I love having Donald. Donald has always been one of my favorite Disney characters, especially of the main characters. And having him in this show was a huge draw. Like when I first saw the artwork and heard that they were going to include him, that was a big deal to me. It was something that I was very excited about for the show. And I didn't even know that dynamic yet because I hadn't read those comics.
Oh, okay. So it was kind of an extra for you at that point.
Right. So I really liked that part of the comics. Like, I've not read a lot of Carl Barks stories yet. I've read a few here and there, and of course I've read Volume 5, which is the first volume that Fantagraphics released. So we started with 5, working our way back, and then eventually we'll get to the earlier stuff. But so yeah, being introduced to the whole Donald dynamic actually came with the new DuckTales for me, and then started going into the comics.
Yeah, so again, you kind of work backwards, but it all makes very good sense once you get to that point. And you said Volume 5 is Christmas on Bear Mountain.
Yes.
Which was which I think most people listening are going to know, that was the first appearance of Scrooge McDuck anywhere. That was Carl Barks' first story featuring Uncle Scrooge, kind of as a one-off character. He wasn't intended to come back. He was just kind of a story device, a rich uncle. And you'll see in there, in that story, where Scrooge kind of turns a corner, relatively quickly, and he shows a lot of different emotions, but it's not the character we came to know. The real evolution, and I think if you see the first volume of Fantagraphics' Uncle Scrooge, which is only a poor old man, the volume number is not in front of me right now.
Is that I think that's in 6.
I think that's what it is. Bear with me 1 second. I would rather get people. Volume 12 is only a poor old man.
Oh, okay.
And that is the first 3 issues of the Uncle Scrooge solo title. And if you really read those first 3 stories, that's where the character solidifies. So it's only a poor old man, back to the Klondike, and then the one that I believe it's untitled. I think it's just referred to as the horseradish story. And you really read those 3, and that's where the character really congeals, because you see you see where from whence Scrooge came. You see the relationship with Donald and the kids, and that they really do love each other, and they're really willing to go to the the ends of the earth for each other, with the usual frustrations of family and pretty low wages. But but that's where you see the character come to be. And when you get to the end of Back to the Klondike, and I won't give it away for people who haven't read the original story, but you see where Scrooge not only loved Goldie, you see what he was willing to do for her. Mm-hmm. And you see where Donald and the kids are really trying to get their uncles back. When when you go back to some earlier stuff before 1950s stories in the 10-pagers, because in Walt Disney's comics and stories, the 10-pagers, Scrooge started showing up a lot, and he was a little bit of a SOB in those stories, but that was Barks slowly rolling out that character, and when you get to those first 3 issues of Uncle Scrooge, that's where everything falls into place, and that's kind of the template that was set going forward.
Well, as we were reading through the Don Rosa library, Pirate was working a little bit ahead of the rest of us because he was preparing for the number of reviews and everything that we were doing. So we would be talking about the current issues, and he'd be like, "Oh, I can't wait until you read what happens in this volume." and I'm kind of getting the same thing of, "Hey, let's just jump to 12 because it's already out." But with 5, I was really surprised when I actually read the introduction of Scrooge for the first time, because you're right. I mean, you can see that he was definitely kind of an afterthought. He was a plot device, and when Carl Barks come up with the character, he really just said, "You know what? This is going to be around Christmas. Let's just use a Scrooge-like character. You know what? I'll just name him Scrooge."
Yeah,
and that's kind of the origin of the character, and he doesn't do much more than just drive Donald and the nephews into this situation where they get into a lot of not really trouble, but well, they end up in trouble. They don't get in trouble; they're just in trouble.
Yeah, just a predicament, and it's kind of slapsticky, but it's a funny story. Mm-hmm. And it's not one of the greatest Carl Barks stories. I'm okay with saying that, but it's monumental. And again, you see that, and there's no money bin. There's no top hat, I don't think, in that story. There, no. The Scrooge evolves, and even when you get to, I think the second time we see him is the Old Castle Secret, which so much of that setting shows up in Don Rosa later for the Dismal Downs and Castle McDuck. Mm-hmm. But even there, I think the second or third panel is Scrooge telling Donald that the family fortune is in trouble. And we all know, how much money Scrooge actually has. So Barks was developing all this. It was probably, I think 1950 was the first appearance of a money vault, not even the bin at that point. So you just grew. You have something. Barks took some. Carl Barks was a gag man at the studio. You know about that, right?
Right.
So, he was just adding. They would have a story, and they would have story beats, and we knew what was going to happen, but he was just adding and plussing with Harry Reeves and a couple of the other guys. And, that was what he did best. And he would write these gags, and they would just mount and make it funnier and funnier and funnier. And that's the same thing that happened with Scrooge, is that, he was rich, and then he wanted more money. But greed isn't funny, but someone who's just obsessed with money as as an obsession, someone who he kind of fetishizes, I think that's the correct pronunciation.
Yeah. But
and the fact that he swims in it, and the fact that he loves it, or he plays with it, and paste it in a book like a stamp album, things like that. So that's really where it came from, and that turned into a corn crib full of money, and then a vault full of money, and then a bin. And you take it from there. And, so again, Barks didn't have there was no outline for any of this. It's not so many comics, and especially animated series today, they all have a Bible. They already have a story arc, season long, or a year long arc written out. That's not how Carl Barks worked. That's not really how most comics worked back then. There was just, you let these things evolve.
Yeah. His time with the studio doing gags, he was working on cartoons. And I had seen his name for credits in many of the cartoons before, but I didn't realize that's where he started. I not knowing the history of his career.
Right.
I just figured it was kind of intermingled, and they were like, "Oh, Barks is the Ducks guy. Go get an idea from him." But I found it interesting that he started there, but he felt that was very restrictive. Like he was not able to truly stretch his wings and write what he wanted to write. So he took a break and just went and started a chicken farm.
Exactly. It was kind of a culmination of things. It was the collaborative effort at that time. Now, the Disney studio, they had a pretty impressive output, but as you know, the films and the shorts, they looked very polished. They looked a lot better than most of their competitors of the time. So they did take a little longer, and I think that was frustrating to Carl. As well as, and this sounds silly, but this is true. The air conditioning affected his sinuses. He was kind of miserable being indoors. He was an outdoorsy guy. He's from Oregon, and he knew about farms and logging and timber. He knew about all that stuff. So the outdoor life actually agreed with him pretty well, which is why exactly what you said. Chicken ranching, and so it was that, and also he was also trying to sell magazines to cartoons. Like single panel gag cartoons. Mm-hmm. And I think the two that were primary at the time that he sold, and I think there's a book collection that I'm probably still obtainable out there. One was for a magazine called Cuckoo, and it was kind of a mad magazine of its time. And then the other one was the Calgary Eye Opener, which was a little more racy, but it was still gag cartoons. Mm-hmm. So he had been selling to them, and I think partially those and some submissions he made got him into the doors at Disney. And then, as you said, I think it was a little restrictive to him, and maybe the collaboration environment wasn't suited to him necessarily. So he left. But do you know how Carl Barks got into Duck comics in particular?
Well, they reached out to him, didn't they?
They were the Disney studio right around the time they moved from the Hyperion lot to Burbank, to the current site of the studio. One of the projects they had in development was called Morgan's Ghost. It was going to be a feature-length film with Mickey and Donald and Goofy. So you can think of that, and you think right around the time they were making Pinocchio, so it would have looked as lush and as beautiful as that. It was in development. It never quite panned out. It was going to be the three of them and a little parrot named Yellowbeak, who was a pirate. And then I think at one point it kind of transitioned into a featurette with Donald and the nephews, and then they kind of shelved it because of the war. A lot of things were going on. Walt was very occupied at the time. So Jack Hanna, who was one of the directors, he and Carl were approached by the studio to adapt this script into a comic book. And they basically each of them drew half the book. I think Carl drew primarily the first half, and Jack Hanna drew the second half, the 64-page issue of the Four Color series. Four Color was Dell's kind of rotating series. Like 1 month would be Porky Pig, the next month would be Hopalong Cassidy, the next month would be Donald Duck. And that's where Donald Duck, Mickey Mouse, Uncle Scrooge, all those titles started as Four Color. Because, they would just show up maybe once or twice a year. And so this was, I believe this comic, which turned into Donald Duck Finds Pirate Gold, I think it was Four Color number 9, if I'm not mistaken. And so that's the first half of it is Barks, and the second half is Jack Hanna. And they both fleshed it out together. And if you look at it, it really does have the flavor of an animated feature. I still think to this day you could make it as an animated feature. I think it's certainly strong enough. And, we have a pirate on the line right here. I'm sure they wouldn't have any objections to that.
No, I mean, I love all of the stories. And it makes me think of Mickey Mouse as the corporate symbol. And there's so much more stuff that was done with Donald Duck.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that I feel like he needs to be put at the center at some point because, I mean, his 85th birthday is coming up, but we're all just still talking about Mickey Mouse's 90th.
I thought we were kind of done with Mickey's 90th, but they seem to be kind of stretching it into this year. And I do hope Donald gets a little love, come June.
Yeah, that'd be great. I mean, with them as many cartoons as they made, and with all this Carl Barks and Don Rosa and all the comics, and I mean, we just recently learned how big Donald Duck as a character is outside of this country.
Yes.
I mean, it's incredible how many people know about him and how big of a star he is.
Absolutely. And yes, Denmark and Italy, the Netherlands especially, they have, I believe in the Netherlands, they have one of their, we have during the holidays, the big kind of TV events here are the reruns of The Grinch and Charlie Brown, Christmas and Rudolph. There's a Donald Duck TV special. I think it was from the 60s, and that's their version. It runs every year, and it's a bunch of Disney shorts, but it's branded as a Donald Duck. I'm sure it's Kalianka, I'm guessing. But it is their tradition. In Italy, I'm guessing you've seen this. It's kind of a digest-sized comic. It's called Topolino.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And that's still one of the highest-selling magazines. If you go to Italy, they actually sell them in coffee shops. So you can imagine going into Starbucks and buying an issue of Walt Disney's Comics and Stories, if you can put it in that kind of American prism. And Topolino sells very well. And I'm sure I've never been to Copenhagen or anywhere up that way, but I'm guessing it's kind of the same way because they really love Carl Barks and they love Don Rosa. Don Rosa goes over there. I mean, he's like Stan Lee to them. He's like Jack Kirby to them. When he goes over there, it is a line. I'm sure you've probably seen some of those photos.
It's crazy. Have you checked out the Don Rosa documentary yet?
I've not yet seen it, but it's one of those things I kind of have in my queue. Life has gotten very busy. I have a nice little stack of books and films that I need to get into, and that's in there.
Yeah,
but I'm sure they have some footage of those conventions.
They do. Yeah. Morgan G. Cale's The Scrooge Mystery. It's phenomenal. Really, really good. And we both Pirate and I have had the pleasure of meeting Don this past year at different conventions. And
that's great.
It was a joy. I didn't have anything yet for him to sign because I was just starting to get into his books.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm hoping to catch him again this year because I have ordered. Fantagraphics is putting out the new Life and it's not the new, but they're publishing the Life and Times of Scrooge McDuck for the first time.
Just in the 2 volumes.
Right. So I'm looking forward to taking those, hopefully, and catching him in Atlanta.
Oh no, I hope you do because I've only I've communicated with Don through email on occasion, and very generous. B, if he knows you are genuinely interested, he's very, very generous with his time and very open. So I could tell anyone, if you are, equally respectful and cordial to the man, he's a brilliant guy and just very smart. You don't always, unfortunately, some people that you admire aren't always the most intelligent or cordial, but he's a terrific guy.
Yeah, I felt like such an amateur when I first saw him. I feel like I was the person that he had that "This is not DuckTales" sign on his desk for, and that was back in last May, and because of Fantagraphics, between May and now, I've now read every single Don Rosa story. I've done half of the Carl Barks library, so I feel like I'm kind of getting to that next level. And I've also been like going on eBay and buying original Don Rosa comics, and it's like, this is so big. I mean, it's such a shame that in the United States we're not having as much advertisement for the comics and giving the comics its due like it is in every other country.
I agree with that, but I'll tell you this. I mean, number one, what you guys are doing now, you're helping spread that message, which is awesome. And because you know what, like you're doing this because of your adoration for the form of comic art and for Carl and for Don Rosa and for both of the TV series. I mean, they're really special. In my eyes, they're very special. And I'm guessing you would agree with that. And as well as, the availability of these stories has never been more widespread until now. And we really have to credit Fantagraphics for that, primarily because when the original Carl Barks Library came out. That was another Rainbow Publishing, which was also Gladstone Comics in the early 80s. And those, if you've seen those 10-volume, 3-book sets, they were never sold in retail bookstores. You could only get them through a catalog. And if your local comic shop was, if they had the space and the interest, they sold them there. But they were very hard to come by. Now, I'm local to Manhattan, so we had some pretty good comic stores. And, I would say, 2 out of 5 would have carried them when they were released. But you could never go into a retail bookstore, for the most part, and have a Carl Barks story obtainable with great frequency. Now, I mean, you can go to a Barnes & Noble or any local bookstore, and if they have a humor section, they're going to have, a couple of volumes of not just the Don Rosa library, not just the Carl Barks library, but the Floyd Gottfredson volumes, and now these Disney Masters, which are beautiful books. And the one that just came out, if you saw, they did going back to Mickey's 90th, they did that Mickey's Greatest Adventures, a color reformatted into a comic book portrait style of some Floyd Gottfredson strips, and it's a beautiful, beautiful book.
Yeah, we love. I've read a couple of the Disney Masters ones, mostly the Duck ones that have come out, 2 and 4, and we got to preview the one that's coming out next week. Great stuff, and that the Duck Avenger one I think is going to be really popular when that comes out in a couple of months.
Oh, I think so too, because that that's been kind of bubbling up in the United States the last couple of years, and I do see a lot of interest in that version of the character where we've really not had exposure to it prior to this. I think in the 90s, I think Disney Adventures, that little digest, I think they did something, but it was a little off the beaten path of what the actual stories that from Italy are. So the fact that that's coming, I think that's going to be a really big deal. And goodness knows, it's one of those, I don't have any insight into Matt Youngberg or Frank Angones or anyone from the DuckTales production crew, but I know they're aware of the Duck Avenger and PK and all that stuff. So I wouldn't be surprised if we don't see something related to that on the show as we go into, a few more episodes.
Yeah, I would love to see a Duck Avenger, Darkwing Duck, Gizmo Duck, team up.
Wouldn't that be crazy?
Fun.
Yeah, I keep expecting a mask or a cape or something to just show up in the background somewhere as, just that call out, something leading into it to just give the internet something to talk about for a few weeks.
And they're really good at on the show with all these hidden references. And now that we've read all these comics, we actually get the references. Which is
you pick up on exactly, and they really dig deep. They really throw them out there. And even if it's a throwaway thing, they seem to really, they're looking at the material, which is great because the original show didn't have that luxury for the most part. They had 65 to get out, and they probably had about 18 months to do it. So they could, and they did adapt some Bark stuff, directly on the old show, on the original series. But the new one, if you even saw the Castle McDuck episode not too long ago, I mean, boy, did they salt and pepper that with Barks and Rosa references up and down.
Yeah, I think Pirate may have read those stories before that episode aired, but Josh and I had not. So when we started reading the stories, when we got to them in the Fantagraphics library, it was like, wait a minute, this is from that episode, and then going back and watching the episode. So I think they're doing a great job of like you said, salt and peppering it in there so that the kids watching the show and the grown-ups too, if they were to find out, hey, this is all based on years and years and years of stories that are out there that you can get your hands on. It's such a great market because people want more DuckTales. People want more Scrooge. They want more Donald. And those Donald and Scrooge stories are perfect. My kids love them.
They really are. And for any age, you really because there are some all ages. And look, again, out of all due respect to everyone in the past, you go back and you look at some of the Dell comics, the Gold Keys, and look, they're not all great. There's a reason that the United States alone is into its third reprinting of Carl Barks's entire library. It's 500 stories and change, And, we had it once in the 80s. They did them in color in the 90s in albums, and now we're getting them again. And, not every comic book artist gets this treatment. I was saying the other day, it's like, I don't see anyone reprinting the entire, issue run of Bugs Bunny or Woody Woodpecker. And some of them are fun and some of them are good, but this is a very, Barks was operating on a very different level than any other artist for that genre.
I think I want to ask David Gerstein, because he'd probably be the one to know of how many jobs Donald has had in his career, because it seems like I feel like I read, I don't know if it was volume 18 or 19 of Carl Barks, but I think it was like 20 stories and they were all Donald had a new job. Even something crazy as like he was a border patrol guy.
That's a great one. Yes. David probably has a list. He probably keeps pretty good count. If you're just going with what Carl Barks had him doing, Donald had some crazy jobs, and a lot. I think that one he was kind of Donald was a little, he was a little loose with it. He was kind of lazy on that one. But some of those mastery stories are some of the best things in the 10-pagers, where Donald is the master glass craftsman, or he's the master blacksmith of Duckburg, and he's great at it. And then one thing always comes along and the town nearly explodes.
Now that's one thing that the IDW comics for the new series, they really did pull from all of those older comic stories. Is when that series started up, the first 2 or 3 issues at least were Donald looking for jobs.
Yeah, that's right.
And
That's
so
right.
I thought that was a great callback once I started to realize that was part of the character.
Yeah, because, again, it's one of these kind of transitions where to translate Donald Duck from the animated shorts, it doesn't go very far in the comics. Barks had to do this thing where they made him an everyman. He was not terribly adept at anything. He was often kind of lazy. He was technically a single parent, but he did what he could, and sometimes he was the hero and sometimes he was the villain. And it worked so well. It was just stuff that you wouldn't do with Mickey on Mickey's worst day. It's and not to bring up the other studio, but Chuck Jones used to say, everyone wants to be Bugs Bunny, but everyone is Daffy Duck. And if you think about it, that's true. Everybody wants to be that suave Errol Flynn confident type. But everyone's kind of like, everyone kind of trips over themselves and maybe gets too big for their britches and falls down like Daffy. It's the same thing with Mickey and Donald. Everyone wants to be well-liked and confident and happy like Mickey, but most people are Donald, who, tends to trip over their own ego or their own feet a lot of the time.
I think that's part of the life of the character for sure. It's that people can relate to him more, and that's why they hold Mickey back.
It is. I agree. And there was a problem. It was a problem as early as the 1940s, where once you got to Fantasia and the Sorcerer's Apprentice, and it's a beautiful, beautiful segment, great animation, and Mickey has never been more charming or expressive without saying a word. But they got very protective of the character, and it fell to Donald to kind of be the funny one. Mickey was kind of more at that point, Mickey was kind of the master of ceremonies of the studio before TV or theme parks or anything. So it became difficult for a while to figure out what to do with Mickey. And I would tell you that the last 15, 20 years, they kind of figured it out. They have a nice balance now. And even, I don't know if you've ever seen I think in 2004, they did that Three Musketeers. It was direct to video.
Yes. My girls love that video.
I think it's one of the nicest things they've done in the past 20 years. I think it's very well done. And actually, if you look at the credits, Don Yips was one of the storyboard artists on it. So there's some comic book DNA there as well. And I think they really handled the characters well. And you saw Mickey in a way where you really hadn't seen him in a long, long time.
My girls got very frightened for Goofy, though, in that story. but it is. It's one of our favorites. It's one of those, let's turn something on, and it's very common that they call for it. I think it's on Netflix now.
I imagine it would be at this point, yeah. It's one of those things where, there was another 15 minutes, it really could have got a theatrical release. And I think it would have been one of those things like a Goofy movie where it would have really captured even more hearts.
Now that's our jam. That's one of our favorites.
Isn't it odd
Goofy
how
movie.
like certain things just, like there was a whole TV series and it did well, but once that movie hit, I mean, that's part of that generation. That is part of their world. That is their lexicon. They love, and the studio gets it. They use it, and they understand like that. There are kids that Max is a character now. He's not just isolated to the Disney afternoon.
Yeah, I can't believe how underrated that movie is with the Disney Studios. We got a Disney DVD Gold Collection release on DVD back in the 90s, and they really haven't released it ever since on Blu-ray or digital or anything.
But what's funny? If you go to the Disney store today, there's merchandise.
Yep.
There's a vinyl disc record. There's like a lunchbox, the kind of thing you would see at, Urban Outfitters. I mean, they are actively. I know there's an active interest in a Goofy movie, and and it's centered around that stuff. So I'm guessing, again, with no knowledge within, I'm guessing you're going to see those characters again within the next couple of years.
Yeah, I feel like it's a cult classic. It's up there with like Nightmare Before Christmas as movies that people just love to watch over and over again.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I think Frank Angonas had mentioned that was kind of what he wanted to do for Donald in DuckTales, in the current DuckTales, where he wanted to give Donald that kind of everyman Carl Barks feel, but he also wanted to do what they did for Goofy, where he could have his moments. And if you saw the finale of season 1, the Shadow War, I mean, Donald kind of broke your heart, boy.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was an Avenger.
Now, by the way, let me just say that was awesome. I am the storm.
This is the best line in the show so far.
It's freaking fantastic.
And I love how it was the Barksian translator that made him talk normal.
Absolutely. But again, there's a lot of love there. I will tell you too, if I don't know how far you guys have gotten with Carl Barks. Did you read In Old California?
I don't.
No, not yet.
Haven't, no.
Okay. If I'm going to recommend any Carl Barks story that's strictly strictly Donald, I really would compel you to look that one up, because I would, and Barks had mentioned in 2 interviews that was one of his favorites, if not his very favorite. There's a lot of heart, but it's not sappy or treacly, and you really see Donald in a noble light, and it's a light that Barks only used sparingly. Things like Christmas for Shacktown, things like that.
Okay.
And I'm just getting it's volume 10. So Terror of the Beagle Boys, which is Barks Library volume 10.
I love that in volume 13, the Trick or Treat. That was my favorite animated short coming into this. And then I read the Barks version, and there's all these added scenes and additional stuff. It's great, and I've been trying to. I read that right around Halloween, and I think for people that love that short, that's a volume just to buy, just to see all that extra stuff that Fantagraphics was able to put back in there.
They did. Again, they're doing an unbelievable job with the restoration and presentation. And I'll even say this. I mean, and again, just for the record, I have no affiliation with Fantagraphics. I'm a great admirer of what they do, what they've always done. I think the size of those books are perfect. Mm-hmm. It's one of the, because you see some comic collections, like they're the kind of things you need a coffee table. You can't read them in bed. These books are just the right size and just the right amount of pages where you can read in bed, you can read sitting up, you can put in your backpack, you can take on a plane, on a train. Like they're great. They're a great way to experience all of these artists, all of these characters, and it not only does it not break the bank, it also doesn't break your back when you read it.
Yeah, speaking of breaking the bank, I mean, just think of how much money and time it would cost for you to put together the collection that you get for and you can get it for either $20 or $30 for the hardback. And like we were talking about earlier on Twitter, that it was like $9 for that flash sale to buy each one of the different volumes.
Exactly. Exactly, and to read it on a tablet, it's just as good. You can zoom. Comixology is another great delivery service where you can tap the panels and it'll zoom it up automatically.
Yeah, I was reading comics over the last few years on Comixology and didn't get back into print until just over the last couple of years. And I love that feature, and it's a great way to read comics, being able to zoom in like that. And it's just, you set it over to that feature and just swipe panel by panel.
And it's terrific. And again, especially when you're getting to someone like Don Rosa, where you have just an unthinkable amount of detail, and you can really get in there and see all the little inside stuff. Or if the gyro is there and his little helper, you can really see what the helper's up to. And and Rosa, especially, he really was a student of Mad Magazine and Harvey Kurtzman. You could see, he would write tiny little lettering gags on signs that you would really have to have good eyesight to see otherwise. And you can zoom in there, and their restoration is nice and crisp, so you can really see, you can get the gag, which is beneficial. And to that end, I should say, Carl Barks passed away in 2000, right around the time the internet was really kind of coming out of the ground in the mainstream. One of his last interviews, he was saying that, he said, with the kids now, with video games, with interactive computers, and all this stuff, he said, my work is not going to transcend the novelty of alliteratively named animal characters doing funny things. It's not going to carry over into the age of computers. And for a short time, I'm like, gee, Carl really was intuitive about a lot of things, and I thought, I guess he's right. And then the last couple of years, all this stuff came back in a bigger and better way than ever before, with the shows, with Fantagraphics, with the standard comic books. And then they're showing up on Comixology digitally, beautifully presented. It's like, God, Carl, I hate to tell you, Duckman, but you were wrong. It's bigger than ever.
Yeah, it's definitely a great year to be, or a past few years to be a Duck fan, for sure.
It's been easy.
Yeah.
It's been easy for us. I mean, like I said, we've moved from DuckTales into the comics side of this fandom and this community, and just like you said, it's at your fingertips. If there's ever if I'm ever having a conversation and I don't know what someone's talking about, I can go to Comixology and get that issue or get a collection that includes that issue for, $20 or less most of the time. I can go over to Amazon and order it and have it here in a couple of days. It's just a good time to be able to read all this great work. And, it really surprises me because I was into comics in the 80s and I was at the comic book store almost every week. And I never once paid attention to these comics. And I wish the guy at the store had been like, have you ever checked these out? You read a lot of Ninja Turtles. Maybe you should check this out.
I know, because, some comic stores didn't carry them. It was in the 80s, around the era of Ninja Turtles, it would have been Gladstone. Because I think Western kind of stopped around 1984, so it would have been Gold Key / Whitman. So around 1984, I think that's when they stopped, and the license was kind of thrown around. They weren't going to do anything for a while. When Another Rainbow formed Gladstone imprint, I think it was 87. I think it was the summer of 87 that started, maybe 86. But they were their own independent. The distribution was still. It wasn't the way it was today. Don't forget too. 1987. That's when you didn't even need to go to a comic shop. You could still go to your local candy store, stationery store, 7-Eleven kind of place. They still had that squeaking rack of comic books. And luckily for me, I 2 or 3 local places always carried them. I was fortunate that they carried Marvel, they carried DC, they carried Archie. And that same month, I think it was July of 87 or 86, that Harvey reinstated their line and Gladstone started the Disney stuff. So all this all ages stuff kind of came back into the mainstream. And, but comic shops may not have been even aware of it. Because it was coming from such a small place. I mean, Another Rainbow was in, I think it was Scottsdale, Arizona. And unless the owner of the shop was a Carl Barks fan, it wouldn't even have been a blip on their radar.
Yeah, the current store that I go to, he was a big fan. So he's very excited about some, the books that are coming out and what's out there. But the place that I went growing up, which I did, my first comics were at a gas station that was close to my house, and then I had a cousin who was a collector, and he took me to the comic book store for the first time, and then it became an almost weekly thing with my dad, which my dad was into comics when he was younger. So it was just something that we always did. But I just don't remember. I look at some of these covers and think, man, I can't believe I didn't pick this up at some point. But I didn't, apparently. But I'm glad I'm getting to enjoy them now, and I'm getting to share them with my kids. And that's been a lot of the joy.
True.
I feel so misinformed back then because if I look at my comic book collection from when I was a kid, I had the Superman's Dead comics, and there's Ren and Stimpy, and there's Simpsons, and I'm like, there's Ren and Stimpy and Simpsons, and I could have been reading the complete life and times of Scrooge McDuck. I mean, that was right there in front of me.
I know. I'll tell you this though, you have the luxury now because when Life and Times came out, it was every other month. So those original 12 chapters, that was a 2-year wait. So we had to go. It was I guess it was 2 years straight where you had to wait every other month, and I think some of them were 15 pages and some of them were 32 pages. So that was a real run to the comic shop when I knew Uncle Scrooge was out that month.
Nice.
It was really exciting. But I mean, part of the fun at that time, whether it was, local candy stores or gas stations or comic shops, it was the thrill of the hunt, That was part of the fun of it pre-internet because you couldn't just dial something up. You had to go around.
Yeah, the death of Superman, I remember trying to get an issue of that. And my dad was going even when I couldn't go and checking. And he kept telling me, I can't find one. And then he gave me one on Christmas.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so, because I still remember this. I was like, you're a liar. That's what I told him when I opened it. Apparently I was a bad kid, but I remember trying to find that issue because we didn't have any place to, other than asking the local guy or asking the guy at the gas station who never knew.
Right. Yeah, he wouldn't, obviously, of course. But I'm wondering too, it's like, I guess I don't even know, if you bought that somewhere that wasn't a comic store, that was in that black poly bag, right? It was black with the bloody symbol. Right. I don't even know if that was sold in a retail environment now that I think about it.
Yeah, I know that my printing was a second or third printing, but it was a comic release.
Inside.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm wondering, there must have been a newsstand edition. They couldn't have not, even at that point.
Yeah, they did because they did the armband. And I'm pretty sure that was...
That's why it was the poly bag. You're right, the armband inside. The 90s was really the changing of the tides with all that stuff.
Oh, we went hard superhero at that point.
It's understandable because, and look, and that was the era where Wolverine and Lobo were king, So it's, and Ninja Turtles. And so, Talking Ducks weren't going to be on many people's radar. That's understandable.
Yeah, I don't really know where the transition took place, but at some point, and I moved from DuckTales into Darkwing Duck, and then that transitioned even further into superheroes. So, it wasn't long until we had the X-Men on Fox talking about cartoons. Right. And so introducing, those comics to, a whole new generation as those comics really picked up and started selling like crazy. But it really changed the market. And I know Don talks about that a lot, about how, he was doing Duck stories during the time that the market was really changing towards superheroes. And it is unfortunate that so many people in the U.S. have missed out on these stories. And we just hope we can shine a light on it with our podcast and our discussions and the website. And, we try to cover whenever we see a sale on Comixology, because I'm a huge proponent of the digital medium for comics. It's a great way. My wife hates every time I bring another short box into the house to stick in a closet to put comics in, but
you know what? You're right. It doesn't only save room, it might save your marriage.
Right. But my tablet has a ton of comics on it that I can pull up at any time without having to go thumb through. Then again, there's something nice about thumbing through a short box.
There is. There's a tactile pleasure to it. But when you have a tablet full of comics, you know what I do? And I can't wait to take another plane ride to the West Coast. I can't wait for that 6 hours.
Right.
Dan, you have to take a picture of your collection or all the Fantagraphics volumes on a shelf, because I'm sure all of them look really great next to each other.
I would love to. I would love to do that. I will because I'm kind of doing a little rearranging, cleaning up around here. But when I do, I will send you guys a nice shelf photo.
Like I said, we do the digital versions for most of them, but I feel like the complete life and times of Scrooge McDuck, I needed to have that one as a hardback.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's the one I want to definitely get signed when I see Don Rosa next.
I think that's maybe the best possible thing you can get signed. I actually have the original. I think Another Rainbow collected the original 12 chapters in a kind of a black hardbound book. There was a sketch that Don Rosa did inside of it, and he signed it. And that's a very, it's a beautiful, beautiful collection. And they did a litho of Scrooge and Goldie, and so that's a great. But the current one that Fantagraphics doing, I mean, it's that wonderful cover from the first chapter on there.
Yeah, and I've been trying to, because I also want to get the individual comics signed, and I've been looking on eBay, and I have to make sure I'm getting the Gladstone comics and not the re-released Disney Comics logo on the covers.
That's right.
And yeah, and they retail. I mean, retail on eBay, but like almost $15-$20 a piece.
They were very collectible before anyone put them together into, collected them into albums or books. They were already selling for pretty high prices, in comic stores. They were wall comics, which were not common for Gladstone. Mm-hmm. They were wall books for comics shops, so they were already going for $15 to $18 at that point. And the other thing to know, at one point Gladstone was doing paper covers. Have you come across those?
I think I've seen that on some of the listings on eBay.
Yeah, I think for about 6 to 8 months there was a paper shortage in general, but the glossy, slick paper covers, the exchange was, they said, look, we either have to raise prices or we're going to do paper covers for a while. And in fairness, and this shows you the kind of person Bruce Hamilton, the owner, the president of Another Rainbow, he said, we'd rather just keep the prices the same and do these paper covers. So you're going to get them on time and you get them for the same price. And that's pretty big of them. The thing is that, it does change the wear and tear of the comic. Right. So some of those paper covers might be a little bit more fragile, the staples and everything. Mm-hmm. But I'm sure you'll complete that collection. I'm very confident you will.
Have you been reading any of the new DuckTales comics?
I have, and I got to tell you, they are extremely well drawn, and the stories that I'm not going to mangle his name. I think it's Joe Caramagna.
Caramagna.
Terrific stuff. Some of them have really made me laugh out loud. But if you look at the art, it's just, they literally look like screen grabs from the show.
It's phenomenal. Every time I do a review on the book, I can't get over the art. It just and as someone who, I'm an amateur artist, I like to sketch and I like to draw, and I like to look at those just for inspiration, because they're just, like you said, it looks like it came right off a cell from the show, except you see a lot more expression and movement. I mean, you can feel the movement in the panels on these comics. I love it. I love the art, and the stories have been a lot of fun.
It expands very well on the show, and it's great to have during these long hiatuses that they've been having.
Exactly, it's a nice little placebo for the interim. And you know what else was nice too? It's that was kind of our first taste of Della. Mm-hmm. I think issues like 3 through 5 was Scrooge, Donald, and Della kind of flashbacks.
And I love that dynamic of their history, too. We've not seen it much on the show. Well, I guess we did get it in the one flashback where Scrooge explains what happened, because they had traveled all over the world and all this. But in those comics, that part of their history in the show, that part of their history isn't from the source materials. Because in none of the source materials did Donald travel with Scrooge and everything without the nephews.
Exactly.
So it's kind of new ground for the show.
It's a brand new angle, and the fact that, I don't know what the future holds, but I think it's great to have a new character like that where, one of the biggest questions in duckdom is who are the parents of these three kids, And now we have a little bit more of an answer, and it's a logical answer. And, if they do bring her into canon, it's like, Goofy and Max. It's like Max has a walk around character in the theme parks, and he's considered part of this core group now. If they do that with Della, I think that would be great. I think she's a great addition to the Duck family, and she has the temper of Donald and she has the bravado of Scrooge. And if they do kind of go back further and we see the parents, if we see Hortense and Quackmore, that's going to be a lot of fun too. I kind of hope we get to that.
Yeah, Frank's made some comments that they know how it works and they know where everybody fits in the timeline, and they've got this stuff worked out because they wanted to alleviate any fears. So I'm hopeful that we do get them in the story at some point.
Yeah, I think it would be fun because why not? They were, the studio was always kind of reticent to kind of sketch and background on these characters. It's always that question of like, well, Mickey and Minnie aren't married; they're just really good friends. And, you marry them and then they become grown-ups, to kids. I get that. Goofy can be someone's dad, but he can't be someone's husband because then he's a grown-up. He has to be this kind of – there has to be a bit of a gray area there so it works. But it's like, with this, why not? Why not? Because, again, there was some editorial scuffle with Don Rosa. He wanted to include Ludwig von Drake as – the husband of Matilda, of Scrooge's other sister. And the editors I guess at Egmont at the time, they were not really open to that. They said, I think one of the editors just didn't like that character. Mm-hmm. They said, no, he can't be included, which is unfortunate. And, you can add him in however you want. I think it would be a fun addition. And, it's that kind of thing too, with same thing where you read all of Rosa, right?
Yes.
So you got to the very end with a letter from home.
Yes, we did.
Where Scrooge. Okay, so originally Rosa wanted to get Hortense in there, and the editors overseas said no because it's Donald Duck's mother. We haven't covered that. She should be considered dead. So he couldn't do it. So he didn't say she was dead, but she just wasn't there.
Right.
Yeah, Don in the documentary said that one of the stories he wished he would have written was about Della and what happened. But he didn't know how to finish it. Like, what if they met up with Della again? What would happen to Donald and the kids' relationship? Right. So I'm sure he's gonna roll in his grave whenever Della finally makes it back to everybody.
Exactly. It's because it's a tricky situation to get in. But if you look at it too, it's like, the kids technically were, even in the old shorts, like they were visiting Donald. They never necessarily lived with him. They're staying with him. There's all different ways to look at it. But the current DuckTales is maybe it's a bottle thing. Maybe it's its own world, and that's fine too. Everyone has to keep their, you can keep the canons however you wish to keep them. Mix and match.
Right.
I would have loved to see what Don could have done with the Launchpad character. I know he did one DuckTales comic.
Yes.
But he would have been great with Launchpad.
Oh, I think so too, because he would have made. I think Don Rosa probably would have made him dim-witted but smarter than everyone at the same time. And actually, if you saw some of have you ever seen the William Van Horn stuff with DuckTales?
Was that the earlier issues of the DuckTales comic or the later?
From the Gladstone era, he did a couple of longer adventures, and it was Launchpad, Scrooge, and the kids. And then he did these shorter stories, which was Launchpad was a test pilot for Gyro's inventions.
Was that has IDW republished those recently?
They just did one volume called DuckTales Classics, and some of those are
okay. I was thinking that was some of the ones in that one.
If you get a chance, they're a lot of fun, and they're just loose and they're funny. And if you think of early Carl Barks, it's very early Carl Barks in their execution and the humor.
Yeah,
there's kind of a loopy fun sensibility to it.
Yeah, I started on that, but we were trying to keep up with the Beyond DuckTales with following the Don Rosa. That honestly, it's right here on my iPad. I need to get back on it. but I haven't finished that. I'll definitely get in it.
No, I mean, that's something that's just that it's a fun diversion. But yeah, I think for what you're working on now, to get through Rosa is there's a lot to unpack there. And when you get to Barks, it's just it's a volume. It's not only quality, it's volume. He did so much. And when you get to some of these longer adventures, and when it's what's a standard, they're in Duckburg and they're walking down the street, and then when you get to these locales and you see some of these panels where again a funny animal artist just goes crazy with these exotic locations, or they're in a plane and you can see the shadow of an island being cast onto the water. He did some really beautiful stuff that, Carl didn't have to do it, but he chose to. Carl Barks is a very big fan and subscriber of National Geographic. That was a lot of his adventure and historical reference came from National Geographics.
The story in this volume that Carl Barks did about the town full of volcanoes, there's a story in the back of the Fantagraphics volume that details that him and his wife packed a bag and took a day trip out to an dormant volcano in an area, I believe in California. That's where he lived, and to just for reference and to get an idea of what that kind of area would look like for the story.
And but again, in a pre-Google Earth world, that's what you did.
Yeah.
As long as you were local to it. And it really, and it shows the word. And even, I'll even say Volcano Valley is it's not really as much of an adventure story as it is kind of a farcical comic. It's a little more wacky for Barks, even in his early years. But there's a lot. It's a strange tale, but again, as you go on in the next year or two, you actually. If you look at Ghost of the Grotto, which is also in Volume 5 of the Barks Library, that one, that gets very scenic with the knight that's going to kidnap one of the kids. And there's a lot of shadow work. It's a little, it's a little ominous.
Yeah.
And Barks did that better than anybody.
Those panels are amazing with all the blackout with the blue background, and you get a fire, so you get a little bit of light here and there. It's really great. I spent a lot of time just looking at those panels because you're looking at the silhouette of Donald, and of course you use you got to kind of cheat and draw his eye in there to get the expression.
Right.
And it's all wonderfully done. And although honestly the story itself, I wasn't a fan of the story, but visually it's gorgeous. I loved looking through this.
Right, but I felt like that one, especially that early on, because again, the difference is, these books are being printed. Each volume is linear, so it's in the order in which they appeared and were basically drawn. Right. They're just not being published in a linear fashion. You're getting a little taste of the 40s and 50s and soon the 60s. But for that era, which I guess it would have been 1948 for Ghost of the Grotto. I mean, that was a little heavy for that time.
I could see that.
To see them kind of in, not comic peril, but actual real peril. So there was some atmospheric stuff in there. And if you look at some of those panels too, as later on years, especially Only a Poor Old Man, the first Scrooge, the first issue of Uncle Scrooge. Did you read that one yet?
Did you say the first issue of Uncle Scrooge?
Yeah.
No, I have started with the library with Volume 5 and reading through the libraries.
Okay.
I mean,
so
I have read a few stories here and there, but I'm not sure which ones they were.
When you get to, so let me just make sure I have my numbers right. Okay, Volume 12 is Only a Poor Old Man. That'll be the first 3 issues of the Uncle Scrooge solo title. And I'm not going to blow it for you. But there's a splash panel in Only a Poor Old Man that will blow your mind and make your eyes fall out.
Okay.
And that's all I'll say.
Challenge accepted.
Yeah. The people listening who read it know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, they're all nodding going, Duck fans, they get passionate.
Because you see, like, this guy didn't just care. He really wanted this story to be something.
Yeah, when we get to that point of reading it, we'll just tweet you and we'll just say, Dude.
Yeah.
In all capital letters.
Absolutely.
You know what we're talking
I'm
about.
going to hashtag back, right?
Yeah. So Dan, we could talk all night about this, but we do have to somehow fit it into a podcast as well and get it out there. So, but before we wrap up our discussion, I think I and Pirate have a question for you. Separate question. So we have two questions. This is something that's been on my mind ever since I wrote a blog in the very early days of Duck Talks, because everyone was asking, how does Daisy fit into the new show? And so I did a little bit of research, and I came across the fact that in Don Rosa's headcanon, he has said, and this was in an interview, so I don't know if this is like how he holds to. I don't think I've seen it referenced since, but he has.
I think I know where you're going.
Has said that in his mind, the nephews call her Aunt Daisy, and she's not married to Donald, so she might be or must be the sister to the boy's father. Now, I know we would consider you a Duckstorian, and what was the word that's been going around this week that we didn't know about? Donald.
Oh, Donaldist.
A Donaldist. What do you think about that? How is that something I've seen that it was from an interview. What's your thoughts?
I think that's certainly. I think it's a great solution, and it's very possible. I mean, I think there was a time in America where, if there was an adult if you were a kid and there was an adult in your life, you would call them Miss or Mister and their first name or last name, or if it was a little closer but it wasn't family, you could call them Aunt. I'm guessing that's kind of where Barks got that from.
Aunt B from.
Right.
Wait, was it?
Yeah, from
was
me,
Aunt
right.
B actually related?
No, she was actually Andy's aunt, but I think you had like a neighbor that was, fairly close. Someone, I think that's where that came from. I think that's kind of what Barks had in mind, because I don't think he ever got into that.
No.
I will say this: if I'm going to just look, if I was going to write that story, I'm not going to say what I would have happened to their parents, and everything going on with Della right now is perfectly valid. I would say this: the kids, as we know them, they're upstanding. They're kind of smarter than their uncles for the most part. They're also very noble woodchucks. Mm-hmm. I would say their father is military.
Okay.
Would you agree with that? I think their father is probably a pretty top-ranking official in some military capacity, because boy, are they good at being junior woodchucks, and that might just be in their DNA.
I could see that fitting.
Yep.
I've always shipped Della with Launchpad somehow, because they're both pilots.
I've seen some people say that, and I don't always put it in that perspective, because even in my mind, Launchpad is a new character in my mind. In that world. But you know what? Anything's possible. And again, it's like I say have fun, and some people like have to stick to their canons or established canons. I'm like, have fun,
right? Yeah. Ever since I heard the thought of Daisy being their aunt on their father's side, I've really liked that. I'd like to see that happen in the show. But I just thought that was very interesting, because I had never thought of that. I've grown up in a part of the country that calling someone an aunt or uncle is very common. So it never hit me as being odd until I read about it, and then I was like, I really like that.
Yeah, I mean, even before Rosa said that, I always kind of accepted it as that. It was just kind of like a respectful thing. Mm-hmm. But kind of a it was she was a close non-related adult in their lives.
Yeah, Mitch, wait till you get to the stories where Daisy is dating Gladstone. I remember reading that. I'm like, oh, girl, no, you didn't.
Yeah. It gets pretty hairy.
There's a lot of people online who are passionate about that relationship too.
See, I'll tell you that. I would tell you the only reason Daisy does that is to get under Donald's feathers. Because a Gladstone is just Gladstone. You can only take in small sips. Right. But I will say, one of the best uses of Daisy is Christmas for Shacktown. If you've read that one yet, and that's one of the title Fantagraphics stories. Daisy is put to perfect use. She's not used as a nag or a battle axe like, some of the animated shorts posed her that way too.
Yeah.
I
was going to say, I think Rosa did a lot as well.
Yes, he did. He did, which says a lot because, Barks, I don't think Barks had a problem with, depicting a compassionate female. It's just, Daisy if you watch those animated shorts, she wasn't in many of them. When she was there, just kind of like, antagonize Donald the way the kids did or the way Chip and Dale did. Mm-hmm. She didn't have a lot of layers until, more recently. So it's nice to see her used well. And I'm sure if she does come into DuckTales, I'm sure they're going to have a proper use for her. I don't think she's just going to be, it's not going to be some female duck,
right.
Yeah,
and they have, Frank has actually spoken to that as well. He has said that they have come up with a number of ways to bring her in the show, and none of those really felt like they were monumental enough. Like they were not respectful enough. They're going to do something special with her, I believe.
And I think that's the right way to do it because that's and again, not to treat them as IP, but that's a valuable character, and you shouldn't dilute her, and give her a good reason.
Oh yeah,
to
the younger generation watching the show is more familiar with the character than we ever were, because she's been on Mickey Mouse Clubhouse and the Mickey Mouse shorts that are out now. She's used a lot more, and she's very prominent in the parks as well.
Right, and for good reason. It's like there was a time when they kind of again didn't know what to do with those characters, and really since the late '90s, there was the Saturday morning. It was a House of Mouse, mm-hmm. and there was one right before it. Name escapes me. Where they did the shorts,
right? Traditionally
animated shorts, and they used the characters, and they gave them a little more to do. They weren't just these icons on stickers and T-shirts and mugs, and that's where this current generation of kids, like, that's where they know them from, and they're good because they need to know that these are cartoon characters.
Yeah, they used to always talk about the Fab Five, and then Daisy kind of got added into it, and now it's not a Fab Five, it's Fab Six or Sensational Six or something.
Yeah, and it should be because you know what? It's like they're great, and they're all very flexible. You can do so much with those characters. Why not? And again, you even see now they're using Horace Horsecollar and they're using Clarabelle, and they're great characters. And why not use them?
Yeah, I think the last topic I wanted to talk about. Well, I want to talk about a lot of topics, but I just wanted to geek out with you on how awesome the Three Caballeros is, like, huge right now. I mean, they were just on DuckTales. They have a new series coming to Disney Plus at some point, hopefully next year or this year. And I mean, Don has two amazing stories that feature Three Caballeros, and
that was in the last two volumes. It's in the last two volumes.
Yeah, volume 9 and 10 for all the Three Caballeros fans out there. You need to check out volume 9 and 10 for those stories. They're fantastic. I would love to read a whole Don Rosa volume on Three Caballeros.
Oh, so and I'm very sure he had a third one in mind. I don't know that, but I'm pretty sure and I'm sure it would have been even better than what we saw. I'm sure he would have built upon that, because let me tell you, when you're talking Three Caballeros, boy, that's one of my favorites. I could watch that. I can't watch everything on loop all the time. I can't, I could watch that movie anytime, anywhere, any day. I love it.
Yeah, I like this. I mean, the song is just iconic, and there's a couple of good YouTube ones that try to loop in all the different versions of that song, whether it's DuckTales or the original. I think it's a lot of fun to watch.
No, it is, and it's so great that they brought those characters back. And now even you go to Epcot, they're on the ride in Mexico, and the animatronics are there. And there's they did new animation, which looks like the original film. Like, I think it was Eric Goldberg who animated the genie in Aladdin, supervised it, and it's really beautiful. They combined live action and animation. I mean, those characters, the last decade, they've come back in such a big way. And number one, I couldn't be happier. Number two, let's get more. Let's have some more stuff.
Oh, when that show finally comes to the Disney Plus, I would imagine we're going to get a lot of merchandise and more. I can't imagine that show doesn't get picked up again. From those that we've heard from, it's fabulous.
Yeah, I've seen just bits and pieces, and it's really, really well. I mean, it's really well produced, and even down to the colors, like they really they did a nice job. They made it contemporary, but they absolutely. I think it's something special, and from what I'm to understand, like they left it well open at the end, so there can be more if it does prove to be successful.
Well, I believe it will be. I think that there's a huge market in the U.S. For the Three Cabs. We've become huge fans of them in the last few years. My girls, we bought it digitally not long ago for one of our movie nights. And I tell you, my youngest daughter, I have no idea how many times she's watched it, but I just walk in and find it on all the time.
No, that's awesome. That's, you know what? And for how far back, a 70-year-old film, right? That doesn't happen often.
Yeah, it's definitely one of our favorites. Now, the song and the characters have always been, or not always, but in the last couple of years have become big favorites in our household. We had a trip to Walt Disney World, and that ride, I don't know what it, I mean, like I enjoyed the ride, but I don't know what it was for her, but it just sparked something. Like we were in line to get back on it, and she's trying to say their names, and it's funny because people in the line are trying to help her say Panchito. And it was great. So we're really looking forward to what they're going to do with those characters. But I love those two stories. Those are two of my favorite from Rosa.
He absolutely nailed the characterizations, and he even, God bless him, he even fit the song in there.
Yes.
Yeah, and I love how one of the stories is based in Mexico and the other one is in Brazil. So I like how he went to each of their countries.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And and I'm sure again that third one probably would have brought him to Duckburg or
Oh man, we missed out.
I know, but but to get them back was so terrific. And have either of you been to Disneyland in Anaheim?
Yes,
that would be my specialty.
Oh, okay. They have at California Adventure during the holiday season they do Viva Navidad, and the Three Caballeros come out and they do a whole Latin infused Christmas show, and I believe the characters their beaks move, they do some singing. It's pretty nice.
Yeah, it's a kind of a little mini show that comes out. They do that alongside with a little show for Coco. The characters.
Oh, from the film, sure.
Yeah, and so it's a great little thing that they do every year. They just started to do the Lunar New Year in the same area right now, so they do different events throughout the year in that location, and it's just really cool that they're able to bring those characters back, and people are love to see it. They wait for the little parade thing or a little show that comes out, and they love seeing it. It's a great little thing.
It's become a tradition for a lot of people. Yeah. Actually, if you know Amy Meberson, she's one of the really talented artists. She's been doing a lot of the Disney princess comics and the Pocket Princess. I know. Yeah, I know from her. From her social media that Viva Navidad, that's one of her favorites.
Yeah, and over here on the East Coast, Walt Disney World's they've done a number of things they've kind of tested with them. I know before, I can't remember, I think it was like spring or before spring of last year, they had something at Animal Kingdom. This was before the Donald's Dino Bash opened, where they were doing like a little stage show and dancing with everyone. And now they've moved over to Magic Kingdom to that parade that's being incorporated into Mickey's birthday. I don't know the name of it, but I've seen several videos online.
But it's the Three Caballeros.
Yeah, the Three Cabs have been featured in those.
Right.
Yeah.
That's great. No, because you know what? Why not? And you have there's nothing offensive about Jose or Panchito. I think they're great characters. It's nice to see Donald have his friends, his contemporaries, and it's just, that music, you can't help but kind of like move your body to it. There's so much fun. And God help me, I would love to see another film. I really would. I would love them to do a new one. And I think you can do it. I think it's a good time to do something like that.
Well, you've got me hoping Frank and the crew bring them to Duckburg now, because my mind's just racing at what those stories could be.
Oh, it's unbelievable. Yeah, and again, you can just do some kind of funny stuff, and then you can bring it to an adventure. You can bring it to Mount Rushmore, or somewhere like that. You can do something very American. Have Donald kind of take him around, and gosh, there are unlimited possibilities because they're such fun characters, And there was going to be another Latin American film in the 40s.
No.
And this one, I don't have my reference in front of me. There was a fourth film because, it's Saludos Amigos. You had Three Cabs. Then they did, in Melody Time, there was that one segment called Blame It on the Samba with Jose and Donald and the Araquan Bird. In between, there was going to be another Caballero-style film, and they were going to go to Cuba. And I think it was going to be a crow. So it was going to be Donald, Jose, Panchito, and this crow. And because Cuba was very well known for cigars, it was actually going to be a tobacco plant. And like the cactuses in the Three Caballeros, the tobacco leaves would grow and roll up, and there would be smoke, and there would be dancing. I mean, it's certainly not politically correct these days, but it would have been that kind of, phantasmagorical, fantastic musical thing that they did so well. So I think it was pretty much the war was done. So that kind of Latin American thing, like, that wasn't really on anyone's radar anymore.
Right.
You already kind of had that relationship solidified, unfortunately, because, it would have been, I always regret, like, would have been nice to see like a couple of shorts with those guys.
Yeah.
But hopefully, there's always a chance down the line that we'll get to see those. And, with Fantagraphics, there's a lot of Jose and Panchito stuff from overseas, and maybe Disney Masters will figure out a deal to package those.
That'd be really awesome. We know a lot of people who listen to the show who are big fans of those, like people even learning those languages in order to read them.
Isn't that something else? But yeah, but what a great way to broaden your horizons, get a little more cultured, and via the thing you love, so much. That's a great way to do it.
Dan, it's been a pleasure. We've gone an hour and a half now, so we don't want to take up too much of your time, but we'd be interested in continuing some of this conversation.
Oh, I would love to. And guys, thank you for having me. It's been a real pleasure talking to you. I apologize for dominating you for over 90 minutes here.
No, I'm fascinated with your knowledge, and I knew that you were going to be this knowledgeable on the subject just based on following you on Twitter for the last couple of years. But you constantly blow me away with how much you know about this medium, about animation and the comics and all of it, even the studio information. You were one of the people I went to when I first had a question about the Donna Daisy thing. You were one of the first people I thought of because I knew you would know what was going on there. So thank you for joining us. And, our listeners, I'm sure they would benefit from also following you on social media. Why don't you let our listeners know where they might be able to follow you?
Sure. The only platform I'm currently on is Twitter from whence we've met. You can follow me. The screen name is @HanuDan, HONUDAN. Hanu is a Hawaiian word for sea turtle, Dan being my first name. I chose that just because it's short and it's quick. So you can follow me there for sure. I was running a blog for some time with some Disney comic stuff on there. And as time permits, I'm going to get back there. It's been a while. But if you go to that Twitter page, as soon as I start updating again, you will start seeing posts show up there. And there are some long-form articles I've written about the Disney comics of the 90s when Disney was running their own comic company. The more relevant one to Carl Barks and Fantagraphics is I wrote a series, I think 2 or 3 posts now on the Disneyland comics that Gold Key and Dell had published that were focused on the opening of Disneyland and that were kind of set in the park and stories that were framed around it, and kind of the offshoots of that. So those are online. If you want to find those, you can go to, get your pencils, kids. It's icanbreakaway.blogspot.com. And I'll tell you right now, it has not been updated in about 3 years. I am working on stuff now. In fact, I have some art I just procured that is some Floyd Godfredson stuff that I don't think anyone has seen for quite a while. So that's going to be the first post as soon as I return to that forum. And so that'll be a nice tie-in to all the stuff we've been talking about there. And he did draw Donald, and Floyd Godfredson did not draw Donald and the kids very often. And that's about my reach online. But if you approach, I will if you have a question on something, if I don't know it, I will make sure I point in the right direction.
It has been great following you for sure, and it's been amazing speaking with you tonight and being able to talk about Fantagraphics, what they've put out with all of these volumes and this wealth of duck stories that just go on and on and on. So much to read, and thank you for joining us,
guys. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for keeping this show going. You're doing a terrific job, and you're really you're keeping this stuff healthy and out there, and I'm sure you're attracting people to the comics that might not have gravitated towards it otherwise. So you're acting as a really good conductor for some really good work. And thank you to both of you, the three of you, and thank you to everyone at Fantagraphics, because we have a lot of good things out there, and there's more good stuff coming.
Yes. Well, thank you for saying that. I mean, that's definitely why we're doing it, because like we said earlier, we wish someone had pointed us in the direction of these comics earlier. So if we can introduce it to someone, that's all the joy we're going to get. We're going to really, we're thankful for that opportunity.
Oh, that's terrific, guys. Well, thanks again for everything, and I'll talk to you again soon.
Yeah, Dan.
Yeah, thanks, Dan.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
All right, have a great night.
You too. Have a great one. Well, thanks for checking out Duck Talks this week. I hope you enjoyed that. I'm sure you did. I know a lot of people have been excited online and sharing. Dan posted on Twitter that he was going to be on the podcast, and a lot of people have been sharing that. So it's really cool. He's got a really cool following, and I've always enjoyed having conversations with him. So maybe it'll introduce us to some of those, to some more of those people. Maybe it will introduce us to more of you. But that's going to be it for us this week. We'll be back next week, hopefully with a surprise guest. I'll go ahead and just kind of put that out there. One that we're very, very excited about. And, if it doesn't happen, I won't tell you. They'll show up later. But as of right now, it's in the books. We can't wait to be back. And, until next time.
Good night, guys.